Hi folks, welcome to topic 3 of Unit 2 of the National 5 Biology course. Today's topic is going to focus on reproduction. It's quite a short topic, this one, and it's usually one which students do well in, but we'll still go over the main points because there are one or two areas that students can drop marks. So let's go through the content first of all. So cells are diploid, okay, which means that they have two sets of chromosomes. Now, most cells in the human body, for example, are diploid. Okay, and we'll look at some of the examples there on the slide. We've got muscle cells, neurons, liver, kidney, skin, cheek. All of these are examples of diploid cells, okay? And they are in the majority within our body, okay? So most cells are diploid, which means they have two sets of chromosomes, okay? You need to remember that definition of a diploid cell as well. Okay, so do make note of that and do try and remember it. Now, we're not really interested in these cells so much in this topic because we're looking at reproduction. Instead of looking at the diploid cells, we're going to be looking at a set of cells that are called the gametes. Okay. Now, the gametes are haploid cells. And what that means is that they have one set of chromosomes. Okay. So the cells that are involved in reproduction are called gametes and they are haploid. And we can see them in this image here. We've got an egg and we've got a sperm. They're the two gametes in animals, okay? So humans, for example, and most other animals use an egg and a sperm, okay? So the gametes are the egg and the sperm. And you probably already know this from general knowledge, but the egg is from the female and the sperm is from the male, okay? So the names of the gametes are the egg and the sperm. Now, eggs are produced in an area called the ovary within the female, okay? So we've got one ovary here and we've got one ovary here. Okay, so there are two ovaries. And fun fact, they alternate releasing an egg from month to month if all is working as it should. Okay, so they don't both produce an egg every month. And for the males, we have an organ down here called the testes, and the testes are where sperm are produced. Okay, so the testes will produce sperm and they produce them in very large numbers, whereas the ovary releases one egg a month. About 250 million sperm will be released each time via the testes. Okay, so it's a much larger number that are released in terms of sperm. Now let's have a look at what the two gametes look like closer up. If we look at them closely here, we can see that the sperm is much smaller than the egg. So eggs are much larger than the sperm. Okay. And you can see that that's quite a nice visual to display that. Another fun fact, the egg is the largest cell in the human body and the sperm is the smallest cell in the human body. So what do you need to know for your exam? Well, you need to know that sperm have a tail, okay? And that tail is going to help them swim towards the egg, okay? So they have a tail that helps them swim towards the egg. And we can see that here in these images, that tail that comes out back of each of those sperm, and that helps to propel them forward. Now, both of these cells have a nucleus, okay? Both of them have a nucleus. We can see the egg nucleus over here in this image, and we can see the sperm nucleus is in the head of the sperm, okay? So the nucleus is in here within the head, and the egg nucleus is right in the middle of it. Now, that's important because when we talk about what happens when they meet each other, it's important they both have a nucleus. So when they do meet each other, a process known as fertilization will occur. Okay, and what is fertilization? Well, we've got our sperm and we've got our egg. So the fertilization is the fusion of the nuclei of the two haploid gametes. Okay, haploid gametes is just another word for the egg and the sperm. Okay, and you could say in your exam it's the fusion of the nuclei of the egg and sperm. That's fine. Okay, but here it says the two haploid gametes in order to produce a diploid zygote. Okay, now let's think about what's happening here. So we say that this sperm is haploid and that egg is haploid. But what does haploid mean? Well, it means you have one set of chromosomes. Okay, so if you're haploid, you have one set of chromosomes. Now, when they then fuse together, when we fuse the nucleus of those two cells together, we also join together both those sets of chromosomes. So we go from having one set of chromosomes here and one set of chromosomes here to having a cell which has two sets of chromosomes and therefore is diploid. Okay, whereas these cells up here are haploid. And that's a common thing to be asked in the exam is name a haploid cell, you would say your egg or your sperm. That's a common thing to be asked in the exam, to name a haploid cell, and you would name either your egg or your sperm. And if you're asked to name a diploid cell, you would name the zygote, okay? Sometimes it says which cell is made from the fusion of the haploid gametes, and you would say the diploid zygote. Okay, so a few terms to learn there. I would suggest, if I was you, memorising that whole sentence there. If you can memorise that whole sentence there, it's going to help you answer a lot of questions in the reproduction topic, and you're going to get a lot of marks from that, okay? So that's well worth investing your time into memorising. And then finally, that diploid zygote, that's the initial cell that is born from the fusion of the nucleus of the egg and the sperm. That diploid zygote then goes on to divide, okay? And we can see this little ball of cells here. That little ball of cells has come from the division of one original diploid zygote, and it keeps dividing until we get this little ball of cells, and we call that an embryo, okay? It continues to divide to form an embryo. Now, there's obviously a lot more that happens after this point, but we are not interested in that in terms of the course, okay? So we only need to know up to the point where the diploid zygote divides to form an embryo. So in plants, things are a little bit different. The gametes in plants are called the ovule, those are the female gametes, and the pollen, those are the male gametes. These, because they're gametes, these cells are also haploid, okay? And that makes sense because gametes are going to fuse together. And when they fuse together, they'll form a diploid cell because both of them are haploid. Now, ovules, that's our female gametes, are produced in the ovary. So that's easy to remember because the ovary is the name for both the plant and the animal organ that produces the sex cells. And we have pollen, which is formed in the male organ called the anther. Okay, and we can see the anther up here, and we can see the ovary in this area here. Now, not only do you need to be able to name those organs, you also have to be able to identify them if you were given a diagram in an exam question. And we'll look at a couple of examples of that in a few moments, actually. So the anther are these things here, which protrude out from the base of this plant here. And the ovary is the organ which we find in the centre at the bottom here, okay, within the flower area. Okay, so hopefully that's a nice little summary of all the content you need to know in reproduction. As I say, it's a really short topic. There's not a lot in it, but what is in it is important that you learn it well and you know it all. Because when a topic is short in content, it means they are likely to ask about quite a lot of the content in the exam. So let's move on to some of the SQA past paper questions. Okay, welcome to the second part of the lesson where we're looking at some past paper questions related to reproduction. So here's a few of the things, the kind of things that they might ask you in the exam. So let's kick off with the first one. And as always, after I've read the question, feel free to pause the video so you can answer it yourself before you hear the explanation and the answers. So which of the following pairs of human cells, okay, that's an important one, human cells, have the same number of chromosomes? Okay, so the key thing to remember is humans are animals, okay? So when we're talking about humans, we're talking about when we learned about it, the animal cells. Now, most of the body cells are diploid. However, the gametes are haploid, okay? Now, diploid means two sets of chromosomes, haploid means one set. So what this question is asking us is, where do we have two pairs of cells where one is body and the other is body, or where one is gamete and the other is gamete? That's essentially what you're looking out for there. Diploid and diploid, or haploid and haploid. So let's have a look. So we've got a liver cell in this first one, which is a diploid cell, and we've got a sperm cell, which we know is a haploid gamete. So therefore, it can't be those two. Okay, they do not have the same number of chromosomes. Next up, we've got a kidney cell, and we've got a sperm cell. Kidney is diploid, sperm cell's haploid. So same thing, they do not go together. Next up, we have a kidney cell and a liver cell. Now, they're both diploid body cells, so therefore they are going to have the same number of chromosomes. But let's just check D to make sure. The liver cell is diploid, but the egg cell is haploid, so again, it can't be D. So our answer must be C there. Okay, question 11. Which of the following diagrams represents the process of fertilization in plants? Okay, so this is fertilization, but in plants. Now, we know that in fertilization, the nuclei of the haploid gametes will fuse together to give us a diploid zygote. Okay, now if we have memorized and learned that phrase, that should hopefully be easy to apply here. Now, we know that what is formed from fertilization is a diploid zygote. Okay, so we get zygote there, we get zygote there, and we get zygote there. So it's one of those three straight away. We know that a gamete's not formed, so we can score that one out. Okay, we know it's not B. Fertilization. Now, the key thing here is in plants, a lot of students will rush to go with A here because they see the sperm and the egg fusing together to form a zygote. Now, if this question said the process of fertilization in animals, then A would be correct, but because it says plants, A is incorrect. We go down to C here, we've got pollen, that's a gamete in plants, and we've got the ovule, also a gamete in plants, and they form a zygote. So that looks right to me, but again, we'll always just check all the options. So we've got the ovary and we've got the testes. Now, testes for a start, that's in animals, and it's the organ that produces the gametes. And the ovary, found in both animals and plants, is the organ that produces the gametes. So it can't be D either. And once we've eliminated all them, C is the only one which can be correct. So we go with that. Okay, next one, the diploid. And that, I'll underline that. The diploid number of chromosomes in a cell from a kangaroo is 12. Okay, a kangaroo is an animal, so we're thinking animal cells here. If the diploid number is 12, okay, that's the total number. Which line in the table identifies the number of chromosomes for the cell type shown? So if the diploid number is 12, that means all diploid cells will have 12 chromosomes. And the gametes, which are haploid, will have half of that, so they'll have 6 chromosomes. Okay, so let's have a look at the options. The sperm, which we know is a gamete, that should have 6 chromosomes, but here it has 12, so we know that's wrong. The skin, that's a body cell, that's diploid, should have 12 chromosomes. Okay, it tells us diploid is 12, so skin should have 12. It doesn't, so that's wrong. Nerve, also a body cell, which means it should be diploid. That's not got enough chromosomes. And lastly, the zygote. Now, we know that the zygote is a diploid cell, and if it's a diploid cell, it should have 12 chromosomes, and therefore that one is going to be correct. So there we go. Okay. Now, number 9 here shows the structures present in a flower. Okay, the SQA love to give you a diagram showing the parts of a flower. So it's well worth remembering those plant reproduction parts. Now, which line in the table identifies part X and the type of gamete that it produces? Okay, so let's have a look at part X. X is pointing to the center part here of the plant. Now, that's the female part of the plant, and that is known as the ovary. Okay, the anther, the other options in C and D there, the anther is this structure up here. Okay, that's the anther, but it's pointing to this one here, so that's going to be the ovary. Now, the type of gamete that's produced, well, we've said it's the female part of the plant, so it's going to produce the female gamete, which is the ovule. So that's going to be B for that one. Okay, let's look at another example. This time, X is pointing this structure here, which is the anther. Okay, so we know it's going to be A or B. The type of gamete that's produced, well, the anther produces pollen, which is the male gamete. So therefore, the answer is going to be B. Okay. So again, you can see really similar question, but they're just asking something slightly different. So make sure you know your plant reproduction parts. Number 10, which line in the table below identifies correctly the male gametes, okay, and the site of production in a flowering plant, okay? So these are important things to remember. Site of production, flowering plant. So the male gamete in a flowering plant is not the sperm, it's the pollen. So we know it's going to be B or D. And for the site of production, well, testes is animals, but anther is plants, okay? So we know the answer has to be B for that one, okay? And we'll look at one more example here in the multi-choice. The diagram shows the main parts of a flower, which row in the table describes the types of gametes produced by the anther and the chromosome complement that these gametes contain. Now, before I even look at that question, I'm already thinking chromosome complement for gametes, that's going to be haploid. Okay, that's something, again, I suggest you go away and memorize, because if you know that straight away, this question becomes very easy, okay? So chromosome complement is haploid. And then what's the type of gamete that's produced by the anther? And again, if you know that the anther produces pollen, which is the male gamete, then this question becomes extremely easy. And reproduction is a topic that students tend to score well on, so in order for you to make sure you're up to the same level as all the other students, you need to make sure you know all of the reproductive parts within a flowering plant. Okay, let's have a look at some of these slightly longer questions. Okay, so we've got human gametes. We have to name gametes A and B. So hopefully we can identify from the picture that we've got a sperm and that we've got an egg. Okay. Okay, for B, we have to name the organs that produce gametes A and B. Producing the sperm is the testes, and producing the egg is the ovary. And you can see again, These questions are not difficult. You just have to have learned these terms, okay? So that's something I suggest that if you haven't done yet, you go away and do, look over them, do some active recall, some spaced repetition, make sure you know them well enough that you can just recall them in an exam situation. Okay, part C, gametes are haploid. Give the meaning of the term haploid. So haploid means to have one set of chromosomes. Haploid means two sets of chromosomes. Haploid means one set of chromosomes. And again, I'd suggest you go away and memorize those so that you remember them in the exam. It's really common for students to forget, or they say something like haploid has half the number of chromosomes, which is true, but what they're looking for here is for you to say one set of chromosomes. Similarly, people sometimes say with haploid, they would say one chromosome rather than one set of chromosomes. Okay, so you need to remember the full definition to get the mark there. And D, we've to name the diploid cell formed as a result of the fusion of gametes. The diploid cell is a diploid zygote. Now, you don't have to write diploid in the answer because it mentions it in the question there, but I always, just out of habit, just put diploid zygote together. If I always say diploid zygote, I will always remember it as diploid. So when I get a question that asks that, I remember it. Okay, in the same way that I'll often just say haploid gametes out of habit, when again, I don't always necessarily have to say the word haploid, but it helps us to remember which is which. Okay, we've got a flowchart showing a summary of events that occur during reproduction in a flowering plant. Okay, great. So we get sex organ A and B, which produce ovules and pollen. We've got process X, we've got cell Y, and then we've got an embryo being formed, okay? So this is reproduction in a flowering plant. Remember to read these reproduction questions carefully to see if it's animal or plant, okay? Because it obviously makes a big difference to what the answer is going to be. Okay, so let's have a look at question 1 here, A part 1. Name the sex organs A and B. So A is producing the ovules, so that's going to be the ovary, and B is producing the pollen, so that's going to be the anther. And again, the most common wrong answer that we get here is where people have applied the animal organs to the question rather than the plant organs. Okay, so just make sure you look out for that part of the question. Often students just skip down to the actual question at the bottom and they don't read the stem of the question. Please read all the information that you're given before you attempt your questions. Part 2, name process X, which involves the fusion of the gametes. And again, if you did as I said earlier on and you've gone away and memorized it, you should know the definition of fertilization to be the fusion of the nuclei of the two haploid gametes to form a diploid zygote. Okay, so you just go away and you memorize that. It's going to take you 5, 6, maybe even 10 repetitions before you are able to do that. But go away and do the work, and it'll mean when you get questions like this in the exam, they'll be dead straightforward for you. And lastly, part 3, name cell Y. Okay, and because again we memorized that definition, we know that the fusion of the two haploid gametes of their nuclei results in a diploid zygote. Okay. And again, if you just said zygote, you get the mark there. But I've just got into the habit of always saying diploid zygote because there are questions that ask us about the chromosome complement of it, such as this one here. So for question 7, part B here, it says complete the table by inserting ticks into the correct boxes to show which of the cells in the diagram are haploid and which ones are diploid. Okay, folks, so let's have a go at answering this question then. So we've got the ovule first of all. Now, the ovule is the gamete, okay? And we know that because we keep saying it in our head that gametes are haploid, right? So if we always say haploid gamete, it means when we're asked to identify which a gamete is, we'll always remember haploid. Pollen, also a gamete, so also haploid. And again, we would tick that box there. And then lastly, cell Y. Now we've identified cell Y as being the diploid zygote, and because we did that, we already have the answer to this question. We've made our life easier, okay? And it's a classic thing where if you do a little bit extra now, you do a wee bit more extra work up front, that pays off for you in the long term. So by continually saying diploid zygote, you give yourself a wee free extra mark there in this question at the end. So I hope that was useful, folks. As always, leave any comments for what was particularly useful, or if you have any further questions or there's an area you're not sure about that you'd like me to cover in more detail. But for now, folks, that's all on reproduction. Class dismissed.